Hi, welcome to Flat Files. My name is Kyle. This is my partner, Chrissy. On this episode, we're talking to Laura Peturson, who is an educator at Nipissing University, teaching in the print department and painting and drawing department. She is a printstallation artist, and it's just a really lovely chat. We talk about wheat pasting, we talk about printmaking, we talk about some various artists out of the East Coast.
We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you know any artists that are interested in installing art in galleries, pitching interesting print installations, or even just working in education and want alternative ways of talking about art and print in their classroom, definitely share this episode with any of those people. If you enjoy this type of content, like and subscribe, consider joining our Patreon. All of those things support our channel so much, and we really appreciate it. Enjoy!
My name's Laura Peturson, and I'm an artist based in Northern Ontario, just outside North Bay, in a town called Callander on Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. I work primarily in printmaking, but also a bit in painting and drawing. And my printmaking practice is both kind of traditional prints on paper and then also really large-scale print-based installations and mural work. And in addition to being an artist, I also teach at Nipissing University in North Bay. And I'm a parent of two wonderful humans.
Oh my gosh, it's so much. I feel like I could barely manage all the things that we have going on. I couldn't imagine also including children into that.
Yeah, and like being a parent is like a big part of my identity as a human, but also like as an artist. And it definitely like affects my art practice and has changed the way that I work too. Like you have to kind of be okay with whatever little small chunks of time that you have. You don't necessarily have the luxury of like always being able to plan a long stretch in the studio. So it's, made me more adaptable and more flexible about, what can I do in like 30 minutes.
Okay, on that topic, so like this is a problem that I have, we have, that we pack our days so full of other obligations that getting out into the printmaking studio is difficult when you only have like a half-hour window. Because I imagine, like, as you know, cleaning takes like a whole hour unto itself. So how do you navigate those little pockets of time?
Well, so I have a lot of different components to my print practice, and I'm often working on multiple things at the same time. So right now I'm teaching a course in intaglio, and I'm also working on show of very like traditional kind of gallery prints on the wall for a commercial art gallery in the US in Cape Cod, and that shows in the summer. And then I'm also working on like a big show of print-based murals that involve a lot of different components. So there's like relief, like wood cuts, lino cuts, paper cuts, and then I have to cut all of the prints out. They all get wheat pasted onto the wall. So there's different types of work that I can do depending on what chunk of time I have. So if I have like 30 minutes, I might do paper cutting rather than like getting out all of the inks and, print. Or you can carve. For like working as a relief artist, carving is very flexible. The only cleanup is like sweeping the shavings into the garbage. So that, there are different parts of the process, but also being able to like break up the process and not feel like you need to do something really ambitious in one sitting.
Do you work out of your home, or do you have a studio that you go to?
So I work a lot out of my home because I'm a parent and it's easier to do that. But I also teach at a university, which is a huge benefit in that I have access to that shop. So, I'll also try to make use of pockets of time, like between classes or between meetings at the university. So I do work at the Nipissing print shop, which is lovely because it's like casual time with students outside of class where like I'm working on stuff, they're working on stuff. But the downside to that is that sometimes, if I go in wanting to print my work, I have lots of students saying like, hey, can you have a look at this? Or like, why didn't my, aquatint work on this plate? So that happens, it kind of like sidelines some of your intentions for the day. But and then during the pandemic, of course, everybody was working at home. We didn't have access. Nipissing was very cautious about everything. So I am just now starting to teach in person, like this spring.
Oh, wow.
We've been online the whole time. And we didn't have access to the university for a long time, even when there was like no one there. So I was doing a lot of stuff at home.
Teaching print, I'm assuming it was printmaking for the most part that you taught online, or was it like something?
It was a combination.
Okay.
So I teach courses in printmaking, painting, and drawing. Nipissing's a small university, so the faculty that work there have to be versatile. So that was, I think one of the reasons I was able to get into teaching at Nipissing. A lot of schools have like specialists, right? Like a sculpture prof and a digital media prof. So most faculty at Nipissing have they're pretty flexible in their practice. And printmaking, we could only run relief and a kind of mixed print media that involved whatever. So I was doing things like cyanotype or like things that could be done at home with whatever limited resources the students might have. So it was and interdisciplinary work where you're working with print in combination with other media.
Right.
So I'm not super great with like digital media in general or like computer stuff. And so the teaching online was not my favorite. I'm so happy to be back.
Talk a little bit about your like installation. I guess I never thought of them as murals, but I get that, they kind of are. I think that was our first introduction to your work, was seeing like an entire gallery taken over with these beautiful relief prints that felt like almost like entering a storybook. I don't know if that was the intention, but it really felt like you were entering this this beautiful like story-like environment.
So I started doing that kind of work after participating in Come Up to My Room, which is a show that the Gladstone does in Toronto, where they have artists, take over different parts of the building. It started with one piece that was like a forest made out of hogweed, which is a weed that is, or I guess it was brought to Canada and to North America as an ornamental garden plant, but it's horribly invasive and very, very toxic and causes like really horrific skin burns. And you can see it sometimes, especially in Southern Ontario on like the edges of woodlands. But it had this kind of resonance with an Alice in Wonderland sort of garden where the flowers were also very sinister and had that kind of, tension between beauty and like danger. And then also a really absurd scale relationship. Like the hogweed looks like supersized carrot flowers. And so the relationship in this particular piece that I did between the figures and the hogweed was like an accurate proportional relationship, but it looks kind of strange, right? Because they're big and then in relation to the small figures. So when you're talking about storybooks, yes, like I definitely think about a lot of, I'm a parent, so I'm immersed in that kind of thing anyway. But then also I really love a lot of the illustrators from the golden age of illustration in the 19th century. So people like, okay, great, Kyle too, yeah. people like Jesse Wilcox Smith or Arthur Rackham. I love that kind of narrative work that is really rich with detail that you can kind of get lost or immersed in. So the Hogweed project kind of led into this whole series of different, I think of them as murals because they're kind of like different walls of the galleries would have different reoccurring images or different themes almost. Mm-hmm. So it led into a series of different murals that together comprised a project called Wasteland Wonderland, where the environments were these kind of fantastical landscapes of genetically modified and invasive species, and then these images of young people kind of like navigating that landscape in order to get this kind of contrast between the children, which, I use kids partly because my sketchbooks are like full of drawings of my kids, but then also there is that kind of tenaciousness in kids, but also like vulnerability. So that quality was working with the project. And then the landscapes, a lot of the work is about the way that these species can really change the character of an environment. And some of the things that are depicted, like starlings, for example, are a bird that I use quite a bit in these works. They have this reputation of being like pest birds, and but they were brought to North America by a amateur zoologist who had this very kind of benevolent, romantic idea about releasing birds that were mentioned in all of Shakespeare's sonnets and poems into Central Park. And of course, like this was like the introduction of a ton of different invasive species that thrived in.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's strange. And, you think like, wow, what a like beautiful idea with horrendous consequences. So I think like that kind of contrast between like what could be like romantic or beautiful and then this really kind of terrible
outcome
reality is part of what I'm kind of interested in exploring in the installations. And then I'm working on one now that will be exhibited at the Martha Street Studio in Winnipeg. And it has a different conceptual content. And the imagery, like stylistically, looks similar, but the subject matter is different and the kind of idea behind it is different. And I'm collaborating with my husband, Andrew, who is a sculptor, and he is going to be making three-dimensional aspects of these pieces that in wood that will kind of come out of the walls in places almost like a pop-up sort of book.
I make pop-ups, so I love that.
Yeah, they're really complex in terms of like the math and the geometry and all of that. So, I mean, it's kind of a fascinating like intricate and different side of working than, would be natural for me, but I like the idea of it and Andrew can do it. So, and then of course we've been like, quarantined together. So talking about a lot of ideas. So working together seemed like a natural thing to do coming out of the pandemic.
Can I ask sort of like a practical side of this type of baking? So you're carving these large, are they usually lino or are they usually wood?
So both depending. I'm using a lot of lino right now because my hands, obviously like it takes a lot of repetitive strain. So the lino is a bit easier.
Yeah.
And they're just really large blocks. And so
what's the general scale of the pieces for the murals?
Well, some of the components are like 14 feet high because they're floor to ceiling. So I have one mural where it's like a cornfield and the corn stalks are really
I've seen that one,
tall. Yeah. And I learned a lot. I've been, I'm always like learning things and then fixing the way I work. But I initially I carved that in one block and printed it in one block by hand. And then I was like wheat pasting it. And I was like, this is really hard to wheat paste because of course the paper like stretches when it's wet and it's much easier to do something smaller. So the last project I did had this kind of forest of birch trees. And what I did was I drew it as one block, but then like chopped it up into blocks that fit on a press and was able to run them through that way. Composition wise, because a lot of the composition work happens in situ in the gallery. I make thumbnails, but placing things is very responsive and intuitive as well. So initially, like when I started making this work, if I had, say, like a group of salmon, I was carving like a group of, 12 fish. But then I realized afterwards that if I carved all those same fish separately, I could still compose them as a group, but then have the flexibility to use them independently and combine them in more varied ways. So I've changed the way that I'm making these projects in order to have the flexibility. It's always like kind of figuring things out as you go and then adapting your process.
Okay, I guess I kind of assumed that you always did it the way you're doing it now. I didn't even think about the fact that you might have tried to do the entire composition in one, but I would probably do the exact same. I feel like my learning curve and your learning curve probably match identically.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is interesting for people to know, and I could be wrong with this, I've never done wheat paste, so correct me if I'm completely off base here. So you're doing all this work. These installations are big. They're taking over like an entire gallery space, which are never small. And you're wheat pasting them up, and they're all hand carved and all hand printed. And then I'm assuming they just get destroyed. Like, how do you even take the wheat paste down? Like, for someone, if they want to do something like this in a gallery, like, how do you propose this to a gallery? Like, is that hard to remove? Do you have to repaint the wall? Like, what goes into that? And also, how do you wheat paste without the ink moving at all? Like, do you use an ink that can be combined with water easily? The technical side, I guess.
These are such great questions because they're so specific that most people wouldn't think of, but like printmakers are, tell me about your ink and why it's not running. And so it does get destroyed when it gets taken down. So all of the prints are done on newsprint, and the process involves painting silhouette shapes onto the gallery wall. So there's a layer of acrylic-based paints. And oftentimes they're like abstract design elements. So ellipses or like a ribbon of color. In the mural with the corn stalks, there are silhouettes of additional corn stalks. So I just freehand that onto the gallery wall and paint it. And then the wheat pasting is faster because I would have like, I have a stack of prints here. Like I would have like a stack of like, 70 birds or plants or whatever. And the way that you do it is you do print in either an oil-based ink or an ink that is non-toxic but behaves like an oil-based ink. So like the Cranfield Safe Wash is the one that I use most frequently.
Okay.
But I have used traditional oil-based printmaking inks too. They both work the same way with the wheat pasting.
Like an Akua ink wouldn't work, right?
I haven't tried. It might, because it's soy, right?
It's soy based. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would do a test. Aqua inks, I like for some things, but the stiffness of the Cranfield ink is something that I like.
Yeah.
But I think like it would be worth a try for folks that are interested in doing this with Aqua ink because of the soy. It might work. You would have to make sure it was very dry because those ones take quite a while to be fully dry. But you wheat paste by mixing up like a flour and water solution and whisking it so it's smooth, and you paint it onto the wall. You stick up the print and then you paint over the print, and so it is like seamless on the wall. It is removed just like wallpaper with a wet sponge and a putty knife, and it takes some peeling. And I have only actually done the removal of it once. So, you know, the poor gallery staff at all the other galleries I've showed at, they're doing it themselves. You know, you are obviously clear about what is involved when you propose an exhibition to a gallery, when you submit to a gallery. But I did remove a mural with the executive director of the Kennedy Gallery in the fall. And it's, you know, labor intensive, but then like putting them up is labor intensive, like that. It does need to be painted afterwards because there's painting on the wall. Yeah. So, and everything gets wrecked. When I showed at the Station Gallery in Whitby, Oleg Swislanko, who's the curator there and an amazing artist, he saved some of them. Like he was really careful with removing some of them and actually saved some. So I don't know what they're probably rotting away somewhere because of all the wheat paste and newsprint. But yeah,
they're definitely not archival.
No.
Do you tend to print any of those to keep like on nicer paper to keep for yourself, or are those works exclusively for this purpose? And then the smaller works, like you were saying, you're doing a show that's more like traditional in the like framed print sense. Though that's kind of where you put that focus.
Yeah, which is, so I haven't done any of the components from the murals as like keeping prints, but I have blocks that I could. So it's not to say that I wouldn't do it sometime in the future. I just kind of haven't. So often when you're making, and you folks are the same, where you make really big projects and then you also make like smaller scale normal works. So often you're just like on to the next thing already, that you don't necessarily go back to those blocks.
It's true. You do just kind of like break it down and say, all right, that project's done. What's coming down the pipeline next? Yeah.
So, I mean, you can always go back and revisit things, and maybe, you know, I love the way Nancy Spiro works. So she's like a huge inspiration for me, just in that she was kind of a pioneer of like printstallation as a genre, but the idea of like developing language based on a library of images that you can combine and recombine in different ways to make new meaning, I think is a really interesting part of Nancy Spiro's process. I like that idea of having this like visual language, and the individual images are kind of like words that you can recombine in different ways to say different things. As I'm always like fighting the physical strain of making these projects. And so if there comes a time when I need to like take a break, that kind of going back to old blocks or doing that kind of thing might be something that happens down the road.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a smart way of working.
Yeah.
It's also, that's how Otis Tamasauskis works. Like
he
was our print professor at Queens.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling us like he makes artwork like playing records. So like he just has like a box of plates that he will print some here and make an artwork out of it. And maybe next time he'll like punch a big hole out of it or mar it up or like hit it with a hand. Like The
Oh,
plates,
interesting.
yeah, like that, like how Nancy works is very reminiscent of like how Otis also works, where it's all about like
Okay.
these blocks that are interchangeable. It's a vernacular, it's a language that you have been
Yeah.
developing, that you can pull those old plates out, reprint them with something new, and it has a totally different context.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Otis's work. He came and did a talk and a demo at Nipissing a few years back.
The term like printstallation, what Otis was the first person to introduce me to that term, and that's like kind of something that he always encouraged students to try to pursue, is to push printmaking to that size limit and that like immersive environment. And it's a tough one. It's really
Yeah.
tough to make prints room sized.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the things that we think of when we look at historical prints are very like human sized. And the idea of printmaking being something that you could disseminate, and that origin from printmaking is so ingrained that you think of it as something you can handle and like mail and pass around. So yeah, it's different to think about using it more flexibly. And I think it helps if you're not uh, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but some printmakers are very technical, right? Like very thorough and detailed in like following the right process and the right way of doing things. And sometimes if you don't know everything and you're kind of figuring things out, or if you have a practice that, you know, like Chrissy, you started as a painter, you're coming at it without knowing like what the rules might be. So you might try things that are not the normal way of doing things, or not like the right way of doing things. But I think that flexibility, and I think Otis again is like this.
Oh yeah, he's a rule breaker.
Like dive in, yeah, and break like all of the rules and not do it the right way, and that there's something that can be really rewarding in that way of working, because it's always new, and it's not necessarily like following a rigid process. But then of course printmaking is like such a process-based discipline that you do need to learn that stuff first, some of the process and the right way of doing things, in order to have problem-solving skills.
I find it like really interesting. Like the thing that I like about printstallation is this going against the idea of the multiple. Like printmaking was like, I'm going to make 50 copies and disseminate 50 copies. But with like a printstallation, like especially with your work, like you're printing on a newsprint, you're pasting it, it's getting destroyed. Like you're not making like multiple copies of the same exhibition, but you're pushing the medium to work in kind of this modular sense, to combine bits to create something new, and then in a new place combine those bits again to create something new again.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'll often think, why print? Like, why am I printing this instead of drawing it with a Sharpie or whatever? And part of it is the characteristic mark making that you get with a relief print. I really love that kind of graphic mark making language. But then also there are multiples within the unique, you know, like space responsive piece. So there might be, if you have, you know, for example, in the mural I have with the salmon, there might be the same salmon printed like 20 times, but it looks like different salmon every time. So you can kind of like fudge things with printmaking, where you might have like, you know, 10 different fish, but it looks like a swarm of individual fish when they're kind of composed in a way that they don't look like a repeat, right?
Yeah.
So
and how does the work that's smaller, that's framed, like I can see behind you, differ but also relate to the larger pieces? Like, do you feel that you come at those pieces really differently? Does the imagery stay the same?
Yeah, I think they're, you know, they have similarities and differences. I think there's a narrative quality in both that I'm invested in. I love making work that has narrative. And so the more traditional works are illustrative in that they have kind of a narrative that maybe is open-ended, but often comes from like a very specific narrative of my own. And the subject matter, there's a lot of like natural imagery based on place and a kind of connection to place and the specifics of the place that I live in. There's a lot. I think the larger pieces tend to be about larger ideas, and the smaller gallery pieces tend to be about either smaller or more specific ideas. And part of that is working with the printstallation. It's like a huge project, like as you said, where you're filling a whole gallery. So it's often like one big idea, whereas the more human scale pieces, or like small scale pieces, have not necessarily a serial nature, but there might be a group of them that are related, but have like different ideas encapsulated in the one piece. And then hopefully they look related, like they could be part of the same world or the same story. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions.
Totally. Do you work in the same processes, or are you more flexible with combining like painting and intaglio and relief in the smaller scale pieces, whereas the larger scale, it sounds like they tend to be like a sort of flat latex paint, like backdrop to the detailed relief prints?
Yeah, the printstallations have like 3 components. Like they're much more like, this is what they are. There's like the latex paint, paper cuts, and relief prints. Whereas the smaller works, it's whatever medium I feel like working in. So sometimes it'll be a reduction print of, a woodcut that has like 6 layers, or it might be, the piece that I just finished has a lino cut kind of key block image. And then some of the fill layers of color are done in relief on multi-blocks. So you're layering different blocks together. And then some of them are screen printed layers. And sometimes I'll use collograph or, like different techniques within the same print. So it's sort of whatever the image calls for, I guess. And also like what I haven't done in a while. So teaching, I think, renews your enthusiasm for every process every time you're teaching it. So every time my students are doing a process, I kind of fall in love with it again. And I'm like, oh, I haven't done this in a while, I'm going to make sure I do that in the next project.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Do we want to move on to some art shares?
Yeah, I'm excited to see some of the things that are behind you.
The first print I'll show you, I guess. This is an etching. There's a bit of glare, so it's difficult to see. And it's...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really deeply etched. It's a portrait by Daniel Hughes, who is...
it's a Daniel Hughes print.
Yeah,
okay.
So I don't know if you know him. He teaches at Queen's, and you have a Queen's connection. So he's an artist that I have just like totally admired since I was a student in undergrad. So this print he made, he lived in Newfoundland for a period of time, and I was out in St. John's doing the residency at St. Michael's Print Shop. And so we reconnected there, and Dan, is an incredible painter, and he was doing a lot of painting, but Newfoundland has this amazing, St. John's has this amazing kind of tightly knit art community. So of course, while he was living there, Dan became friends with all the folks at St. Michael's Print Shop. So he made this etching with the assistance of John McDonald, who's a really great painter and printmaker. And it's so effortless. Like, he does not have printmaking training, and it's like incredible. He just can go into the studio and like draw onto this plate.
It's really good.
Values are incredible. It's so confident and bold. Like, this is a very deeply etched plate, and it has all of these amazing nicks. Like, he's not worried about any of it or precious about any of it. And it just has like a beautiful gesture and like a beautiful value structure.
He's a portrait artist. Like, he knows like how to manage the values of a face and how to like build a composition in a portrait to like bring out all of the qualities and be dramatic. I would say his paintings have a lot of drama to them, which lends itself very nicely to etching.
Yes, there's a tremendous sense of layering. Like, these are really like rich, like it's hard to pick up on the image, but the hatching is really layered, and the blacks are really rich.
Okay, nerd question. Is this aquatint or is this just like a hard ground etch?
It's a straight up hard ground etch.
Amazing.
With some plate tone in places. This is just one of my favorite pieces. And now Dan is also teaching at Nipissing, as well as at Queen's. So our lives just keep kind of like going apart and then crossing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's such a great
That's
share.
a great first share. Love that.
And when I say too, like, that it's like so confident and effortless, it takes an incredible amount of practice and time and drawing to make it to be at that point where it becomes, effortless or looks effortless. So I think it was Paula Scheer, who's like a designer and type artist that works out of New York, and she does all the like posters for the City Theater. But she says, when she's designing a logo or making a design for a client, that, this particular logo took 10 minutes and 30 years. So it's like, it took 10 minutes to do this with 30 years of becoming good to be able to do it like that.
Yeah. That, I feel like that should be on every artist's invoice, quote, proposal.
Yeah. And there's no shortcut to that 10 minutes.
There really isn't.
So maybe I'll show something completely different.
Yeah.
This is a monotype.
Oh, describe monotype for folks that don't know what that means.
So there are lots of different ways you can make a monotype. You can paint like using an additive process onto a piece of plexiglass and then take a print off of it. You can start with a rolled up to black piece of plexiglass and work reductively and take out your mid values and your lights. Or you can work like this, which is a way of layering, not flat, but like a single plane of color, and then blocking out certain parts of the image using stencils. So this is by Eric Euler, and he is a printmaker who is originally from North Bay. He did his MFA at LSU, which is a great printmaking program, and he did the Tamarind printer program at the Tamarind Institute. This print was also made at St. Michael's Print Shop, so 2 out of 3 of my shares will be Newfoundland-made prints. He does relief and he does litho, and I feel like his litho training at Tamarind is visible in these monotypes that he does. So this is pretty small for him. He does a lot of really large scale monotypes, and they're all this kind of really like bubblegum kind of colorful palette that is a little bit at odds with some of the subject matter too, because he has all these like creatures. And this was part of a portfolio exchange that I was part of called the X-Files, where all of the prints were based around conspiracy theories.
Oh no.
And like kind of sort of supernatural phenomena. So the print I made for that one was based on the Windsor hum, which is like a white noise that emanates from an industrial steel plant in the Detroit River and causes like noise like a strange hum across the city of Windsor. But Eric made this print. It's called The Truth is in You, which is a play on The Truth is Out There from the X-Files. And a lot of his work has this kind of Joseph Campbell hero archetype on a quest, being pulled in different directions or dealing with inner demons and this kind of thing. So there's this figure that looks like it's being pulled in different directions and a kind of shadow figure behind it. So there's like the external and internal forces that are playing on this protagonist as he goes throughout his journey. And Eric uses, he must have like a really good intuitive sense of color theory, because the layering, he does a lot of split fountain rolls and they're all interacting with like the previous color that he's put down. And also I feel like you can see some of the litho experience in the almost like dotted reticulated pattern in some of the ways that he's laying down the ink for monotype or putting resists into it. So yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
The colors also make me very happy.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. This is another etching. It's actually a dry point.
What?
And yeah. So the intaglio layer is dry point and the color is woodcut and aquatint. This artist is an American named Ellen Heck. And there are obvious reasons why I love this so much, because, the subject of childhood as, a rich area to explore in terms of interiority and the development of kind of an inner life is something that, I really respond to. This print was gifted to me by my mother-in-law, who's an artist, which, how amazing. And it's, I just love this print so much. I have two of her prints and they're both gorgeous, so sensitive. And she has a really beautiful way of working with the dry point that is in some cases in direct conversation with Mary Cassatt's dry points and some of those 19th century printmakers. She actually did a series called Plus a Century that re-envisioned different Mary Cassatt etchings in kind of a contemporary context.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they have this kind of dignity to the domestic that I really love. And the point of view of being down at the level of the kids playing on the floor, it's called Building Cities. And I think it just captures this kind of expansiveness of a child's mind and way of being at that age.
I was just listening to an episode of 99% Invisible, and the most recent one was talking about, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, so forgive me, but the inventor of the kindergarten, the kindergarten system, and how he wanted to be an architect, but kind of got into education and was thinking about how he could use creativity to inspire children and educate children. And he created these things called gifts, and whatever his name was, I can't remember now, but it was whatever his name's gifts. And at each stage of childhood development, children would be given these different gifts, and they were kind of based on what children were playing with. If a child's parents were carpenters, they would have wooden blocks. And if a child's parent was working in a different, process, they would be playing with whatever kind of the garbage or debris of that employment was. So he took those and distilled them down into these components, like the building blocks, and then was disseminating them as part of this kindergarten educational system. And it inspired, Frank Lloyd Wright and a number of other architects. So even though he didn't become an architect, this educational system that he had made actually got built into some of the most prolific architects of that time period's construction because they were
Cool.
so inspired by what they learned in these kindergarten programs. Anyways, seeing those kids playing with those blocks makes me think of this episode of 99% Invisible.
Oh, I can totally see that. And I think there's something really interesting too in the way that children are integrated into like the adult or the family or the community sphere, like when you're talking about playing with the debris of whatever work was happening. That is so interesting to me because, of course, my kids are in my studio space all the time, like doing things, or they're with Andrew, like building stuff with like the remnants of whatever he's using. And the idea of like childhood as being both, you know, enfolded in this community, but also this kind of own sphere of its like a self-contained world that is sort of, you know, parallel to whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, those art shares were gorgeous. Thank you so much. I loved them. This was a delightful chat.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And thank you again for joining us. And
this was so lovely.
Yeah. Delightful. And always so nice to see you guys and chat.
Same.